Professor Biswas for that.
Can you hear me? Okay, so thank you for that very warm welcome and very flattering introduction. So you'll find that I'm just very ordinary person, okay? After hearing all that, it's not really. What I want to talk about, this is the talk that I've been giving now for, I now have moved away from the idea of just giving different talks in different places to giving the same talk in every place now. The primary idea is that then I can collect more perspectives about one topic for some time. So I've been speaking about this topic now, this may be the fourth time I'm speaking about it. So bear with me if it doesn't suit this audience and it's like a little wacky and so on. But it started, this idea of talking about this kind of topic started shaping up when I was participating. I'm a judge, one of the jury members of this NASSCOM Innovation Awards. And then we select some of the best companies to give prizes to and so on. And I got a chance late last year to see many companies, plenty of companies, what they're doing and so on. So what I sense is that there's something significantly changing in this country, something dramatic is happening. So I try to put my finger on what's happening and all that, but it's very difficult to get a sense of it. So I thought maybe what I'll do is I'll try to stimulate thinking by presenting a lecture like this, and then we can get a discussion and then just to share my thoughts on what really is going on. So I put together these 5 trends which I thought are what I see as interesting trends that could actually change the way in which Indian IT is done. Not that Indian IT is doing badly, it's doing extremely well. For most of you who aren't aware of the numbers, we are like roughly a $60 billion industry, and all the projections seem to indicate that we will continue to grow at double digit, maybe 15 to 17% per year kind of growth rate for the foreseeable future. So it's going to be a phenomenally intensely growing industry which will contribute significantly to just GDP, but nevertheless the kind of innovation that happens in this industry could see some major changes, and that's what I want to talk about. So 5 trends. The first trend is that what I see basically, if you look at the interesting thing that's happening in the world of technology, the focus is no longer on one technology anymore. Historically, if you look at computers, any of you had a computer, what do you measure a computer by typically, historically? What is the processor speed? Is it 2 gigahertz? Of course, now with multi-core you can't ask that question anymore. But for a long time it was 500 megahertz, 1 gigahertz, 2 gigahertz, 3 gigahertz, right? Something like that. Or if you are looking at a digital still camera, what do you measure? Pixels. Is it 5 megapixel? Is it 8 megapixel? 10 megapixel? 12 megapixel? Something like that. If it's a digital TV, you're buying a TV set, what are you going to measure? Which generation of the LCD panel? Of course, now we are talking about LED backlight. But is it the 4th generation LCD panel, 5th generation LCD panel, whatever? Number of pixels and the way in which the LCD is stacked. So you can see in all these device categories, similarly with storage, right, or anything, all these device categories, there's a significant, important technology feature that is driving the next generation of that particular device. And pretty much the whole industry has been clocked in some sense by this generation to generation. What makes one generation move to the next generation? You'll find pretty much that in almost all the cases, the driver in semiconductor industry has been the Moore's law, which you know, that you can put 2 times the number of transistors on the same chip in 2 years. Same size of chip, you can double the number of transistors. That's what Moore's law, right? Because your feature size of a transistor is declining. And now we know basically that pretty much in 2005, Jeffrey Moore, who's the founder of Intel, who wrote the original paper in 1969, from which we derive the Moore's law. He wrote another paper in 2005 himself saying Moore's law is dead. And the reason Moore's law is dead is not because technology can't bring down the feature size of a transistor, but because economically it doesn't make sense to bring it down anymore. So the main clock for this technology changes is gone. Moore's law is dead. But at the same time, what's happening is people aren't interested in technology anymore. If you look at the iPhone revolution, which happened recently, which technology would you attribute as the important technology that moved the product, the phone, mobile phone, from one generation to the next generation? When iPhone was introduced, whatever was there before it. Which technology feature did they change to show their innovation? User interface, multitask. Okay, now for those of you who may not be knowledgeable about that technology, Apple introduced a capacitive touch screen. And if you know technology, the capacitive touch is an inferior technology to resistive touch. It has a lower resolution, which means that you can't use a stylus, okay, on it, and it's expensive. It's lower resolution, inferior technology, but comes at a higher price. But Apple chose to use an inferior technology at a higher price for its phone because, why did they choose it? Because you can use two fingers, double touch, multi-touch. Somebody mentioned it, right? Multi-touch. A resistive touch screen doesn't allow you to do multi-touch, whereas a capacitive screen allows you to do multi-touch. And so they use, by multi-touch you can do all kinds of visual phenomena, like you can do like this to zoom, like this to shrink, like this to move the page and so on. You can't do this. So we saw that actually somebody had come in not choosing the next generation of technology, but choosing an inferior technology, but putting together a product which is visually more appealing and easier to use. And that's really what's going on. Value today is not so much in technology anymore. Okay? This is not very good news for technologists. Like it, okay? I spent all my life doing technology, but it's not good news. The value is in how you put all this technology together to create compelling products or to create compelling user experience. So it's about integration of technologies into a solution for user experience. That's where the value lies today. And if you look at Indian companies over the last few years, you will find that pretty much any technology area, you can find an Indian company has worked on it. RF design, I can show you 10 companies that have done it. Baseband design, a lot of companies have done it. Frameworks, plenty. User interface, phenomenal. Operating systems, great. Anything, okay? Name a component technology, some Indian company has worked on it. Very good. But question is there a company in India who can put all these component technologies together to create a compelling product like the iPhone? Yeah? So that's a different skill. This business of integration, putting together, is a wholly different skill from the business of creating a component technology. And that's where some new skills are getting born. In fact, actually, every new company that I see these days, I see that they are trying to put together things. I don't see too many companies interested in basic technology, raw technology. Most of the interesting innovators in India today are companies that are taking technology that's available and trying to produce something which is a solution. I can give you some examples later if you want, okay, of that nature. The second trend is that today a device, if you like any device, a mobile phone, an iPod, an iPad, any device, anything that you are using, a PC, the device alone is not interesting. At the same time, the content alone is not interesting because you got to interact with the content. The meaning is in the interaction of the device and the content. It's how you put the device and the content together. That's where the most interesting thing happens. iTunes, iPhone without the App Store, or an iPod without the iTunes. Meaningless, right? So how do we put together this? So on one side you are seeing this enormous explosion of content on the internet. A lot of it is generated by specialists like news writers, the media companies and so on. But a lot more of it, 100 times more of it is generated by users like you and me. So we are taking pictures, we are taking videos, we are taking all this interesting content and then we are editing this content even and we are putting all this interesting content on the. In fact, actually I have a younger son who is in the 4th standard and one day I just, out of curiosity, I actually measured how he spends his time. And I find that, the largest single thing that he spends his time on is YouTube in the house. Okay? So it's a phenomenal change. I mean, I would not have thought this, I would not believe this actually. 5 years ago that people will spend so much time watching content. And what content does he watch? He watches all this. The content that he sees on YouTube is other kids opening boxes of these cards, Pokemon cards or something, I don't know what it is. So these interesting cards that are, you get it in these very interesting tins, and then these kids open it and then they take out these cards and then they read out what card they brought. And he spends hours watching that crazy stuff where other kids have opened boxes and then they recorded it and put it on there. Internet. So this is a new world. I mean, we do not understand it because we are one generation away. But that's the world in which we are living in, where there's a lot of user-generated content, and we need these kind of very interesting devices that can allow users to work with their own content in some sense in a collaborative way. So that basically means that you have, it's not that you have a single device that you're working with, you're now working with multiplicity of devices, and they're, the way they interact with each other. So the combination basically of a lot of different types of content with a lot of different types of devices, take the combination, it's explosive. And that explosive combination is where this churn of innovation is happening, in a sense. Okay, so I'm just trying to describe in some abstracts without giving examples. But as an example, I mean, there is this photo walls. How do we see pictures that are coming of I'll give you an example of a company that I saw last year. An interesting company. So there are several people who go to an event. It's like an exhibition. And each of these guys is taking a video. And there is this friend of this team which is going around and watching this exhibition. There is a friend of this team which is not able to go to the exhibition. So the question really is, can this friend experience what the exhibition is like? In fact, can this friend experience this exhibition even more interestingly than any of these individuals are? So there is this product concept which they are talking about, it's called the video wall. Okay, so in this video wall what's happening is every single thing that any guy is seeing in the exhibition is immediately flashed on this video wall along with their notes. So the entire community now, just like in Facebook, they're all talking to each other. They have in the background, it's like a wallpaper, a video wall with pictures changing. Alright? Just an example of a product. Okay? And this is what I mean when I say that an explosion of information, how do you organize it and make it available in a form that makes sense? The third is the rise of the community model. Facebook is an example of a community model, but by and large, if you look inside India, the community model has been very predominant. Historically, Indians are a community that believes in some sense, subsuming the individual on behalf of the community. Always, right? The Western world is full of individuals, they are discovering communities, we have always been coming. So today we are seeing basically that the community model is rising. So it means that you are actually subsuming an individual to that of a community, which means that effectively you can address the needs of an aggregate. Why is Facebook so interesting? It's interesting because one believes that instead of addressing individuals, we address an aggregate personality. A set of that. If one guy buys it in a group, the chances are all the others will buy it in the group also. So rather than looking at individual preferences, we will look at group preferences. And the group as a method of influencing each other is a very, very powerful concept. So effectively, what is happening is that the world is being organized in the form of community. Of course, each individual might belong to multiple communities. So in that sense, his individuality might be expressed. Because you may be in 3 communities and somebody else may be in a set of 3 different communities. So that's how we will be different. But as far as this community that we belong to is concerned, then our preferences are very similar. What happens when you have communities is that the equilibrium shifts a little bit. Okay? I mean, we know, for example, that when a group of people go to buy something, like today if you want to buy a house, instead of you going as an individual, you go as a group of 10 people and negotiate with the builder, you get a much better rate. Significantly better rate. Right? So what happens when you have a group of people? That's how unions are formed, right? Labor basically figures out that management is too powerful, so they join together and then they negotiate. So when you have aggregates, the negotiation equilibrium shifts in favor of the aggregates. So which is why aggregates make sense economically. So basically the power shifts in favor of the aggregates. That's why more aggregates are formed and therefore they get more powerful and so on. And that basically this whole business of shifting equilibrium of an aggregate creates some value in the overall economic situation, and we got to figure out what's appropriate value. How do you create value from a community? It's a question that Facebook today is thinking about. They don't know how to make value from a community right now. Okay, so they're thinking about it. But I want to present this very interesting picture. Economics is a subject that I don't understand much. I've been trying very hard to read economics for a long period of time. In fact, the only reason I teach in IIM Bangalore is because I like economics and I have to teach it somehow, so I teach game theory. But here is a picture from economics which will show India in a completely different light. Okay, this is a measure which is called GDP density. People don't show it, but I found this in a site called Visualizing Economics. Now GDP density is not GDP, because if you look at GDP, India is $1,000 per head of country. It looks terrible actually. US is, how much in US? It's $40,000, right? And there are countries with even $50,000, and most of Latin America is over $10,000, right? Even China is $5,000. India is 1,000. So anybody who does a simple measurement saying that, I need to put together this product, it costs so much, my cost of delivering it to one customer is $500. And I have to get this guy's GDP per capita is $1,000. So if I have to get my return investment of $500, I make $500 investment on one individual. Then I have to get this return back. Out of $1,000, he spends even say 5% on me, which is $50. That $500 I'll get back in 10 years. This is not an interesting proposition, so I don't serve the Indian market. So what happens is the Indian market never gets served, because we are measuring GDP using GDP as a measure. Problem with that measure is that it misses this thing which I talked about earlier, which is that the world is becoming that is getting based on communities and not based on individuals. So what's the more interesting measure is, don't look at GDP but look at this thing which is GDP multiplied by some number of people, which is a community. But how many people do you multiply it by? And meaningful measure to multiply by is how many people are there per square kilometer. This is called GDP density. GDP per capita multiplied by the number of people per square kilometer. Why does that make sense? It makes sense because when you serve a region through, let's say, a Kirana store, this organized retail in India, everybody when it came, they thought that it's going to kill the Kirana shops. When Reliance Fresh came, they thought the local vegetable vendor will die. Isn't it? But what happened? Reliance Fresh came actually, and then the local vegetable vendors' share of the market actually increased. It's not actually gone down. Kirana stores are thriving in spite of all the organized retail that is happening. So the question that we can ask ourselves is, why is that happening? And the answer is that India has a very high GDP density. Okay, so if you look at the world, I'm trying to get this arrow to work. Okay, here. So somewhere here you see the highest GDP density in the world. Then you hear, this is the Chinese region around Shanghai and Beijing and all. And in Japan it's very, very high GDP density. UK is very high GDP density. Where our friend comes from. But if you look at India, the GDP density of India is actually higher than many parts of the United States. You know that? If you take the measure of GDP density, it's easier to serve India than to serve Arizona. I guess that's what this is. Alright? That's what this tells. So, somewhere we are missing it when we look at GDP as a measure. So India is rich, I would say, per square kilometer. India is not rich per person, but who cares about individuals? If I can deliver my product into a Kirana store, it's the job of the Kirana store to deliver it to the individuals. So think about him as my end product. Which is why there's models like kiosks and communities, self-help groups, any groups make sense in India, and I think the next phase of growth is going to come around that, by we thinking about microfinance in such a way, why STS Finance, which is this company, is getting such a lot of press and its valuation is, some people think is abnormal and all that, because there is a value in communities and groups. But here is another picture which you might not see. It's about addressing this thing called the bottom of the pyramid, which actually is work that got done by the NCAER, National Council for Applied Economic Research, way back in the 1999 to 2003 period, which then C.K. Prahalad wrote about in his book called The Bottom of the Pyramid. But the key thing that I think most people don't understand is that if you got to go hit the rural poor in India, everybody thinks that to go and hit the poor people, you've got to strip down technology. You take the thing and you strip it down and make it cheaper, and then you go and sell it to the poor people. That doesn't work. Okay, that doesn't work primarily because in today's view, place where you have television, media and so on, everybody is aware of every product in its biggest glory, right? They have seen all the products, they see the best products, they don't want to buy a stripped down product. They want to buy it. Which is why one of the biggest innovations in India is the sachet, right? The small pan parag in a small, or a shampoo. You buy the same shampoo but you buy it in small quantities. That makes sense. Right? Because it's the same product. It's the same quality of product. You're not reducing the product quality. So the answer is not to strip it down or to make it low technology. In fact, actually to deliver a product to the rural areas, you need to go to the next level of technology. That's what I believe. And the reason why that is there is because of this graph which I have drawn here. If you look at the technology depth, then the cost of deploying technology goes something like this. This is an abstract curve, okay? The cost of deploying technology goes something like this. More and more technology there is, the cost keeps increasing. And it's not linear, okay? On the other hand, if you use technology to serve customers, then the cost to serve a customer goes down dramatically. Take an example, right? Banking. Most of you know that if you go to the bank and you branch, right, and you go and do banking there, the cost of one transaction in the branch is approximately 100 rupees. You know it? That's roughly what it costs the bank to serve you. If you go to the bank, when you spend only a few minutes, like 5 minutes there, the cost of serving you is about 100 rupees. Other than if you go to an ATM and get served, what's the cost per transaction? It's approximately 20 rupees. Okay? It's approximately 20 rupees. So ATM is better than banks, so therefore you should do more ATMs. But the rural poor will never be able to use an ATM. It's too sophisticated. Even to get an ATM to work without power and all this satellite technology and all of it in the rural areas, it's just going to be too expensive. So you've got to find something else, and that's going to be the mobile phone, right? Which everybody's talking about. Next 2 months, we're going to see this big revolution of mobile payments that's going to come. 4 banks are going to start announcing it. And the cost per transaction there is going to be 1 rupee. Okay? So you see the cost of serving a customer starts, if you start getting into better and better technology, the cost to serve a customer falls. And therefore, if you add up those two costs, which is the cost of deploying the technology and the cost of serving a customer, both per unit, then you get this total cost, which looks like this. And you see that there is a hill. Somewhere after you have crossed a certain technology limit, the cost starts falling. So it's not that you need cheap technology or some lousy technology to go to the village. You need some really good technology. It has to be really, really sophisticated. Maybe 3 generations beyond where we are, and then you can hit this bottom of the pyramid. Okay? Now trend 4 is this interesting statistic that I heard in the 3GSM this year in February, where people were saying that while we have maybe 5 billion consumers like you and me connecting to the mobile network and talking to each other, what's more interesting is that there are going to be 40 billion devices in the next 10 years that will get connected to the internet. Okay? Devices means machines, washing machines, microwave ovens, things like that. In every house there are devices. All these devices will start getting connected to the internet. Okay? All kinds of machines, even lights will start getting connected to the internet. Now, what does that mean when you have all these machines that get connected to the internet? It means basically today the internet is flooded with user data. You know, when you do a Google search, what do you search for? Something, let's say cameras. And then people would have written all kinds of reviews about cameras. These are data for people like you and me, written by people like you and me. Imagine the internet is now flooded with data about what's going on in the deepest wells of, oil wells of the sea. I would like to see actually what's going on in that oil spill in Bombay or even in what's going on in that, off the coast of USA. So if the data from that oil well is thrown on the internet, can you imagine what that means? People can search it, they can mine it, they can do research on it. Anybody can research anything. Anybody can see what any telescope in the world is seeing. Right? So that's the future world. So when all this data gets thrown on the internet, then you will see the next generation of engineering, in my view. I call it engineering 2.0. Okay? We have Web 2.0. Okay? So this is when because today what's happening is that the engineering data that is there in the machines, what's going on inside the engines of a BMW or what's going on in the racing track in Formula 1 races is only seen by some selected people, and then only those guys can investigate. But imagine all that data is available for the whole world to see. And there are bright minds all over the world, and we'll see another lot of innovation will start happening. Right? There's just no need for us to be doing serious aerospace research only in the US then. Okay, and finally the last trend is this new word which is called frugal innovation. Frugal innovation, like reverse innovation. Reverse innovation means you strip down the product. Frugal innovation means you find a way to do that same product at a much lower price. And there are examples and examples of frugal innovation coming from countries like India and China. I'll tell you the latest thing that I saw. We were trying to build this little, working with a school. It's like a small pet project of our CEO. So there's a school nearby, and we're trying to make a e-reader device of this school so that the kids there don't have to carry, it's a big thing that kids carry loads and loads of textbooks and it kind of bends their back, right? And the point is that you can either leave the book at home or in the school, but then suddenly if you need to refer to it, you don't have the book. So it's a choice between flexibility and having to carry all that load. But the answer really is if you have a good e-reader device, then all the books can be on the reader and the student need not carry a lot of stuff. And any book that he wants, he can bring up and he can use it. But you have to make the user interface really interesting. So we were trying to experiment with it. Now, most e-readers, at least till about a few months ago, were substantially close to like $200, 10,000 rupees, which will never fly in India. So I was trying to find a device which could be sold at around 4,000 rupees with a lot of interesting features. So we were working with these Chinese vendors. And last week, a couple of weeks ago, I just got a quote from one of the Chinese vendors. The guy is offering me a 7-inch tablet, touch screen, Wi-Fi, USB, Android based with TV features for less than $70. $64 is the price that I negotiated. $64 Android device. So you can see basically that even before this Android phone, this is a tablet, it looks like iPad, which is being sold. iPad is sold for $699 in US. And this guy is offering for $64 a device similar to that, with better features actually. So this is 1/10, right? 10 times lower. And this is what we mean by frugal. We are not saying we make the product look less interesting, it's the same product, but we find ways of doing it. And this product, this Chinese product, has inside it all components are Chinese, from companies that you've never even heard. So the processor comes from a Chinese company, the modem comes from a Taiwanese company, display is coming from another Chinese company and so on. So the key thing is that what's happening today is that this region of the world, India and China, is a very Spartan region. We don't believe in luxury, we don't spend too much money. It's a virtue for us to be, spend less. It's considered a virtue. Whereas if you go to the West, they spend a lot of money. I mean, it's a virtue for them to spend a lot of money. Their heroes are people who spend a lot of money. Okay? Whereas our heroes are people who not necessarily very Spartan. At least historically it's been like that. So there is a culture of being frugal, and this is suddenly catching the attention of management gurus in the world. Is there something going on here in this region? So we have this measure which is called the PPP. You know what it is, right? Purchasing Power Parity. And somehow one seems to think that, if you can buy a hamburger in the US, you don't buy hamburger in India. But hamburger in the US and you can buy a hamburger in India, you can compare the price of the hamburger in India and US. And the ratio of the hamburger in the US versus the hamburger in India is the PPP. This is an index actually. This is an index called the MAC index, it's called. It's a close proxy to the PPP, MAC index. You look at the McDonald's hamburger in different countries. Okay, but the point is, one thinks basically that once the world is integrated in terms of trade and goods move freely, the currencies will normalize. And all this disparity in PPP will go away and everybody's PPP will become one. So the thinking is that the whole world is going to get colored. Of course, you have some regions more than the US, like here in Finland. But there are lots of regions like this which are blue in that. So the conventional wisdom is that the whole world will turn brown, which means that India's GDP will rise to that of the United States, which will roughly be like, if they have $40,000, we'll be like $20,000. And each of us will end up spending a lot of money. This is the conventional wisdom. But actually what might happen, and in fact the last 10 years, there is also this belief that China exported deflation to the US. What might happen is instead of the India becoming brown in color, the US might start becoming blue in color. If you know what I mean? That the GDP of the West can start to decline. When will that happen? When there is so much trade between these two countries that the dominant source of most products that are consumed in the West is from these places where frugal innovation is going on. Right? When that happens, just look at this very interesting piece of statistics, right? We know for sure that the average revenue per user, which means the average monthly bill of a person in the United States for cellular telephone, how much is it? Does anybody know what it is? $50, right? Average. It will be like $70-80 in the Europe and about $100 in Japan. Average monthly bill of a cellular phone user in the US is $50. And what's the average monthly bill of a cellular phone user in India? Yeah? $5 is about 200 rupees. You see, it's gone to 150 now. So it's 1/10. It's 1/10, okay? The Indian phone user spends 1/10 the amount that the US phone user spends. And if you take a large phone operator in the US like Verizon, he's got like maybe 90 million subscribers. And Airtel has about 140 million subscribers. So roughly similar in terms of subscribers. Airtel is making per customer, and the phone is the same. Is it any different? Cellular phone is the same. You're using it for voice calls. Any different? No, no. The network is the same. You have the same towers, the same base stations, GSM base stations, same things, same equipment, same billing systems. Everything is the same. So the cost of setting up infrastructure should be the same for both countries. The service is the same, and the Indian customer is paying 1/10 the US customer. So what can you say about the profits of these two companies, Airtel and Verizon? Who should have higher profit? Should Verizon have higher profit or should Airtel have higher profit? Yeah? This guy Verizon is making 10 times per user. The cost per user for setting up the network and service and phone is the same. If so, then Verizon earning 10 times more per user than Airtel should be making whopping profits, no, compared to Airtel. Who's got higher profits actually? Airtel. Airtel has higher EBITDA margins than most operators in the world. In spite of such a low 1 paisa per second and half paisa per second now. How do you explain this? What will happen if Airtel goes and sets up shop in the United States? What will happen to the services? So this is basically the reverse model of PPP. PPP going the other direction, okay? And this is what I think most of the Western countries are afraid about China. Not so much about India right now, a lot more about China. What are they going to do to the world economy? Okay? So the question that all these slides, all these trends ask is there really something that is going to happen in this country in terms of this made for India phenomenon? Because we have two kinds of things going on in India at the same time. We have the IT industry, which is made in India for the world. We don't make anything in India for India in the IT industry. You ask Rascal, my company, we don't derive practically any revenues from Indian customers. All our customers are Nokia, Samsung, all these guys. So we have made in India for the world, and we have products which are actually world products also sold in India. Right? There's televisions, there's mobile phones, these are all products that are not necessarily made for the Indian market. They're made for the world market, also sold in India, iPhone, BlackBerry or whatever. Question is, when will we start seeing these two things coming together? You can make a lot of interesting things in India. Of course, there are Indian brands, but most of these Indian brands are using foreign technology. And these are foreign technology generated for products made for the rest of the world. So when will we see these Indian technology companies starting to make things for India? And will that change? The answer is probably this is the transition time because of all the things I mentioned in my 4 trends. And I'm already seeing that there are some very interesting things coming together. Right? So this is my summary slide. It's 2 days for this audience at least, that I can take questions. Yeah.
So you just now gave the example of Airtel and the subscribers and the counterpart in US. Would you just explain the answer to the question you put up? Why does Airtel end up it have?
The answer is that Airtel first of all, Airtel doesn't purchase a lot of network equipment. Their business model is that they lease the equipment. They get the equipment companies to buy the equipment, put it out, they put out the whole network, and they buy capacity, voice capacity, airlines from the network equipment, and they have a plan by which over 10-year period they will purchase the equipment. So firstly, they don't buy the equipment. But even these people who have bought equipment, like Reliance, have bought it at prices which are substantially lower, more than 10 times lower than what the US operators buy it. Okay?
That's So second part to this was that what if Airtel does go to the US market then?
That's the plan. I think primarily, if you look, Airtel of course is going to Africa. But if you look at China Mobile, they have very ambitious plans. China Mobile is the largest operator in the world with 350 million subscribers. And their plan is to go international. Step by step. So they have a very ambitious plan. And it scares the hell out of them. Okay. Of course, China Mobile is not as competitive as Airtel in terms of price. If you look at China Mobile price per minute, what they can offer, it's 2 times what Airtel can offer for the same profit level. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. I'm Gagan and I'm pursuing MBA from here. First of all, I would like to thank you for coming here and interacting with us. And my question to you is, what was the turning point of your life, or what the idea came that prompted you to choose this career?
I don't know. It's very difficult to answer. So it was an impulsive decision that was made, I can say. But primarily, 91 was a very interesting year. 91 was when we started this company in Bangalore. But it was a very interesting year. In fact, actually, I remember, the events in 91, India liberalization is one of the big things. But the big thing in the world was the Berlin Wall came down. Very symbolic. In fact, the presentations we used to make from Sasken to customers, the first slide would carry a picture of the Berlin Wall. Because in those days, India was not known. When we used to go and sell, any company from India used to go and sell in the US, we used to sell India. Because nobody knew where it was. Many people thought India was a state in the US. India. They used to think India is a state in the US. Oh, India, my mother's from there. No, not that one. It's like that. So we have to really start with, the Berlin Walls come down, the world is one place, all this kind of stuff. So it was a very exciting, interesting period. And I did all my education in India and I had never gone to US at all. So it was kind of prompted by the fact that we were somehow in India because of our close-mindedness and so on. The whole country had fallen back significantly compared to the rest of the world. The world had advanced significantly compared to where India was technologically. So the thinking was that maybe there will be excellent institution of excellence that we can create like Sasken and so on, like Infosys, company, which would try and lift the level of the whole country, somehow by integrating the country. This is the thought concept. So it's very exciting.
Any mistake or any wrong decision?
In Sasken, plenty of mistakes, right? If you have one successful product, we have made maybe 10 products which have bombed. We call it the Sasken graveyard. To come again to show you the number of things we did. We made a tablet. We tried to make an iPad in 2000. In the year 2000, Sasken launched a tablet actually. A tablet device. So you can imagine, it's silly because it was 10 years before its time. Clearly, everything there is the right time, and clearly the tablet succeeds because of content, and we didn't know content in those days, except email. So there are hundreds of examples of things that we did without understanding business context in some sense. And we poured money, huge amount of money into products.
So I talked about the virtual market, I think was kind of a virtual trade show you talked about. People were able to see the products online, something that you were talking about. What do you think in India, that simulation is still not available? People are not able to work on that virtual trade show kind of an environment. We still are having we are dependable on the Pragati Maidan trade show or something like one trade show, and the whole year we are having just one trade show or that particular focus. Still we are not able to go to that extent. What do you think is the reason behind it?
No, I think, the point is that India is not yet interesting as a place which is producing innovative products. Let me clear. As a place which is innovating and producing products which are of significant interest to the rest of the world, it's still not interesting. You do not come to India if you are looking to buy a plane. You do not come to India if you are looking to buy technology for hospitals. Clearly, right? So, we are still not there. But question is, 20 years from now, will we be that place? The answer is, I think yes. Because I see that something dramatic is happening on the ground. And we'll see the fruits of it in the next 5 years. Something clearly is changing. Okay, maybe it's the next generation of people like you who are entering the mainstream and you're not carrying the baggage that people like me and others are carrying. I don't know what it is. But clearly the thought process is changing. And the kind of things that people are trying to innovate on and produce dramatically different. So I think we'll see in 5 years dramatic changes. I'm not sure about, then maybe we'll have the state exhibitions you're talking about, right? That may be the next step. Yeah.
Sir, is it more profitable to launch or create a company in IT company in India or in USA, considering the fact that India has more number of customers while USA has more profit?
No. If you're doing a product company and you're looking at innovation like Facebook or something like that, it definitely is much better to do it in the US. Okay? Primarily because customers there are willing to experiment, they're willing to put their money there. And early adopters, as it's called, you'll find it much easily in the US. And the ecosystem also exists for you to do a lot of these products very quickly and deliver them in the US. It's not there in India yet. But if you're looking to do something beyond that space, which the Western world understands, like if you want to go hit the bottom of the pyramid, for example, do something for the rural folks. There is no rural folks who call in the US. So that market itself doesn't exist. Then, and as Prahlad very rightly pointed out, I think if you can sell something profitably to the poor, imagine what you can do with it to the rich. This is the question he asked. Right? If you can sell something profitably to the poor people, just imagine what kind of thing it is, right? Just imagine taking it to the rich people, what you can do with it. So that is completely path breaking. So if you're looking like that, then there is no other place to go. Clinical research, for example, people are looking at India as a place because it's the only country in the world where first of all you have so many people, of which so many are sick. And there is such biological diversity. If you go to the US, you will find of course some diversity, but it's pretty much all the people have genetically similar backgrounds. Here, so much variety is there. So you have a variety of people with genetic backgrounds, different genetic backgrounds, and lot of sick people, and lots of people. So big sample, so interesting. So question is, that's a morbid example, it's an example on the other side. But you have to look for opportunities in this country. There are plenty of them. Right? Like somebody said, right, that they went and there was one guy who went and he came and he went to Africa and he found that people aren't wearing any footwear at all. So he said, what am I going to sell in this country where nobody wears footwear? And the other guy came and said, wow, there's nobody wearing footwear here. What a great opportunity is this to sell footwear. So it depends on how you look at it, right? It has nothing to do with the data. Yeah.
You spoke about connecting the microwave or the washing machine to the internet. So can you please elaborate on that point?
See, imagine, for example, that I don't know if you have faced the situation that you have to cook suddenly, and you have the microwave which you can use to cook, but you don't know what to do with it, right? And then now what you do is you take your cell phone, and you call your friend. And he said, listen, I'm going to bake this cake, so please help me. And the person starts giving you detailed instructions. And many of these instructions are related to that person's microwave. And then your microwave doesn't have those settings. Because every model there is different setting. Then I try something, it doesn't work. Such a painful experience. So imagine for a moment that this microwave, because it's connected to the internet, can search for other microwaves like it. Imagine. And imagine on those microwaves there are settings where things are stored, history is stored, so I can replay. I want to bake a cake, whatever instructions I stored for baking a cake last time is stored in that microwave or stored on the internet somewhere. So like a Facebook of individuals, microwaves form a Facebook based on cake cooking or something like that. The recipe is transmitted from here to there and then this microwave starts cooking. What a wonderful world that will be, isn't it? That's what I mean. Okay? As an example, this is an example. Yeah.
So you said, as in like after 20 years, we would be like a developed nation, right? So, but the gap between India and US, that would be minimized a lot, so it would be the same, I think.
It could be the same, but whether it will be the same because India's GDP goes up or it will be the same because US's GDP goes down.
So,
It's the question that we got to
has
ask.
to be like minimized in like as much less than years you can, right? Otherwise, sir, the gap will be maintained and sir, it would be at the prior level.
Yeah, but the point is, it's not, I mean, you're right. So people believe that by 2050, India will cross the United States. Okay? Assuming the growth rates are going to be as it is, the PPP model, everything, whatever we discussed. Assuming everything is normal, India will cross the US GDP in 2050. But I think it will happen much earlier than that. Primarily because of this frugal innovation concept.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, after 4 years graduating from NIIT, how can you suggest that how can we start a company of our own, giving products, innovative products and software solutions?
So it's not an easy one, okay, because I don't want to mislead you into thinking that starting a company is easy. But if you have the drive for it, the best way for you to go about it is to get into an incubator. And there are plenty of them today. And I'm sure Rajiv, you will start now, again, at some point in time. But pretty much, if you go to any of the IITs or the IIMs, you all have incubators. And there are more and more incubators happening. There will be incubators in cities, there will be incubators in townships. Bangalore is thinking of creating an incubator for Bangalore, incubator institutes. And going into an incubator is the easy way of starting a company with your own idea. That's the best way to get started. Because the most important thing in starting a company is not so much even money or even labor, but it's about ideas and about getting feedback on it. So the good thing about incubators is they get associated with a lot of interesting people from the industry who can give you feedback. That's not easy to get, okay?
So IT firms were affected very badly by the global economic crisis. So, sir, how were you able to weather the crisis?
It's hard, to say the least. You learn how to make tough decisions. The most difficult decision we made in 2001 was when we had 4 or 5 of us in senior management and we had a choice. Should we lay off people or should we do something else? Because 3 of our large customers had decided to reduce their work with us overnight, pretty much overnight. And we had hired a lot of people anticipating into work coming in. So we took a call that we will not hire anybody, we will just take 20% pay cut across the board. We didn't ask anybody. We just went out next morning, literally overnight. Next morning we went out and announced to the whole organization that starting today, everybody's salary is down 20%. And anybody would have said that if you go and do a thing like that, the chances are that a lot of people from the company will leave. Now the interesting thing is our attrition rate the year before that was like 12% and it fell to near 0, to 1% or something for the next 2 years. Dramatic fall in attrition. Because people bonded, they said this is the right decision, let's not fire anybody, keep everybody, let's contribute. Somehow it caused a bonding in the organization and we got the best employer award in 2004, okay, after that event. So things like that, I mean you have to take some very hard decisions. We had a very fantastic center running in Germany, extraordinary center in terms of capability. Kind of people that we had there is not very people. But we had to take a call what to do with this center because it was not generating profit. 3 months back we just took a call and we will close it. Close it. So you have to take this somewhat ruthless, sometimes heartless decisions. This is what management teaches you, okay?
No, my question was on this frugal innovation.
Yeah.
I can understand that India is going through this frugal innovation where we pick up ideas from abroad and then we sort of localize whatever it is and reduce the thing. But how would Reliance, etc., get the cheaper thing for foreign equipment? Is
By negotiating. Yeah.
tough negotiate?
Very tough. Oh, it is incredible. You should hear the stories.
Reliance have heard.
Real story. Guy called that fellow for negotiation at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That fellow will turn up. That king will turn up. Till 10 o'clock in the night, the guy will be sitting outside.
Typical.
At 10 o'clock in the night, the negotiation will start. It will go on until 2 in the morning. So the fellow will be completely worn out, lack of sleep, attention.
Reliance keeps all the customers waiting outside.
Waiting outside.
All the vendors are sitting outside.
Super negotiators. Super negotiators. India, incredible in terms of how it can manage to get by.
Chinese are also very good.
Chinese also very good. Chinese are even better. I have never with Chinese, so I can tell you. Thank you.